Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to try to get to the bottom of this whole Justice Department lawsuit against these landlords. It's a big deal, right? I mean, millions of renters are struggling, and this case is all over the news.
Yeah, it's huge. And there are so many angles to it.
Exactly. So to help us break it all down, we've got two main sources we're looking at today. First, we have this in-depth article from AP News, and then we're also going to be diving into some of the really interesting discussions happening over on Reddit, specifically in the R News subreddit.
Yeah, that Reddit thread is wild. Some strong opinions in there.
For sure. So to set the stage a little bit, the Justice Department, along with 10 states, is going after these 6 major landlords who collectively manage something like 1.3 million rental units.
Yeah, it's massive. Just to give you an idea of who we're talking about here, the companies named in the suit are Greystar Real Estate Partners, Blackstone's LiveCore Camden Property Trust, Cushman and Wakefield, and their subsidiary Pinnacle Property Management Services, along with Willowbridge Property Company and Cortland Management.
Wow, some serious players in the real estate world. So what exactly are they being accused of?
Well, the Justice Department is alleging that these companies have been basically colluding to keep rents high, artificially high. They're accused of sharing all sorts of sensitive rental data, like, renewal rates, pricing strategies, even how often they're accepting these rent increases that are being suggested by an algorithm.
Oh, wow. So they're not even like manually setting the prices. There's an algorithm involved.
Yeah, that's a big part of this whole thing. The algorithm comes from a company called RealPage. They provide software to a lot of landlords, and this software includes an algorithm that analyzes market data to recommend rental prices.
So basically, the Justice Department is saying that this algorithm, by using data that competitors wouldn't normally share, is actually artificially inflating those prices.
Exactly. It's like instead of the market naturally determining what a fair rent is, this algorithm is kind of tilting the scales in favor of the landlords.
That does not sound good. And I bet renters are not happy about this.
Oh, you better believe it. That Reddit thread we mentioned, it's full of people who are convinced they're being overcharged. They're seeing these rent hikes, and they just don't think they're justified, especially when you consider, the condition of their buildings, the lack of amenities.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of renters are really skeptical of the whole market price excuse for these increases. They're seeing right through it.
Totally. A lot of the anger seems to be directed at Greystar. We're
Yeah.
seeing tons of comments from people who rent from them talking about negative experiences and what they see as unfair practices. Unresponsive management, neglected repairs, and these rent hikes that just seem totally out of line.
So even if RealPage's software is only being used in like less than 10% of rental units, which is what they claim, it sounds like the impact of this could still be pretty widespread.
That's the argument the Justice Department is making.
Right.
Even if it's just a small number of units that are directly affected by this algorithm, those higher rents could be influencing what other landlords in the area think they can charge.
So it's like setting a dangerous precedent, even for landlords who aren't using the software.
Exactly.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? Like how much power these companies actually have.
Oh, absolutely. It's crazy when you start digging into just how big some of these companies are.
Right. We keep saying major landlords and millions of units, but let's put that into perspective. What can you tell us about the scale of these companies?
Well, take Greystar, for example. They're not just like a regional player. They're a global giant. They operate in the US, Europe, Latin America, the Asia-Pacific region. They have properties everywhere. And they have over 27,000 employees worldwide. That's like a small city, right?
That's insane. Okay, so what about some of the other companies named in the lawsuit?
Okay, well, Blackstone's LiveCore is another huge one. Blackstone, you've probably heard of them. They're one of the biggest private equity firms out there. And LiveCore is their real estate branch focused on multifamily properties. And they've been buying up rental properties like crazy lately.
It sounds like they're really trying to dominate the market. Are any of the other companies focused on specific regions or types of properties?
Yeah, Camden Property Trust is interesting. They're really focused on those Sun Belt markets, the states in the South and Southwest that are seeing a lot of population growth. Places like Florida, Texas, Arizona. They're going where the demand for rentals is high.
Smart business strategy, I guess.
Yes.
So what about Cushman and Wakefield and their subsidiary Pinnacle Property Management? What are they all about?
Cushman & Wakefield is a global commercial real estate giant, and Pinnacle is the one that actually handles the day-to-day property management for a bunch of clients, and including a lot of big institutional investors.
Mhm.
So they're not just focused on residential rentals, but they definitely have a lot of influence.
Right. And then we have Willowbridge Property Company, used to be known as Lincoln Property Company, and then Cortland Management as well. They all seem to be playing in the same sandbox.
Yeah, and at a high level too. We're not talking about small-time landlords here. This is like a whole network of some of the biggest players in the entire rental market.
Okay, so going back to those Reddit comments, what are people saying about their experiences with these companies specifically? Like, what are they seeing on the ground?
There's a lot of anger and frustration. Let me
Oh,
give you an example. One commenter said their Greystar complex tried to raise their rent by 20% in 1 year.
ouch.
Right. And get this, they pushed back. They mentioned the Justice Department investigation, and they actually managed to get it down to a 10% increase.
Wow, still a lot, though.
Still a huge jump, right? Especially if you're not seeing your salary go up by that much.
Exactly. What else are people saying?
Another commenter was talking about how their Greystar property kept raising rents but never fixed anything. Leaky faucets, broken appliances, just neglecting basic maintenance. That seems to be a pretty common complaint.
So frustrating. You're paying more, but you're not getting more.
And it's not just Greystar. We're seeing similar complaints about the other companies, too. It just seems like a lot of renters are feeling really taken advantage of.
Yeah, it's like, okay, is this just a few bad apples, or is this a systemic problem here? Yeah, it's a little unnerving to think about.
It is, and it really makes you think about, like, the bigger picture, doesn't it? Like, we're talking about potential manipulation, unfair practices, but then there's all this other stuff, too, that's driving up housing costs, like zoning laws, construction costs, interest rates. It's all connected.
Right, it's not just one thing, it's like a whole bunch of factors coming together.
Exactly. And this lawsuit and all these personal stories from renters, it just highlights these like fundamental problems in the housing market in the US. The market is supposed to work based on supply and demand. But if you've got landlords colluding and using algorithms to mess with prices, it throws the whole system off.
Totally. It's like the rules of the game are rigged.
Yeah, and it makes you think about income inequality too. Right? When you have a few giant corporations controlling so much of the housing market, it creates this huge power imbalance. Renters don't have much leverage at all.
It's like they're stuck.
And then there's the government's role in all of this. The Justice Department is going after these landlords now, but some people would say they haven't done enough to regulate the housing market or protect renters. It's a whole other discussion. But this lawsuit definitely puts a spotlight on some serious problems that need to be addressed.
So we talked about this algorithm potentially manipulating prices.
Yeah.
But what about these other factors we mentioned? Like how much do things like zoning laws or construction costs actually contribute to rising housing costs?
Oh, they're huge factors. Zoning laws, for example, they can really restrict the supply of new housing. And when there's less housing available, prices go up, construction costs. Those have been skyrocketing lately, which makes it more expensive to build. And then when interest rates rise, it's harder for people to buy homes, so more people are forced to rent, which increases demand even more. It's kind of a perfect storm.
So it's like all these things are working together to make housing less affordable.
Yep. And it's going to take a lot of different approaches to fix it. We need more affordable housing. We need policies that help wages keep up with costs. And we need to think about how to prevent these huge corporations from having too much control over the housing market. It's a complicated problem.
This whole deep dive has been pretty eye-opening. What started as a story about a lawsuit turned into this exploration of all these interconnected issues that affect millions of people.
And that's what these deep dives are all about, right? It's about going beyond the headlines and getting into the nitty-gritty of how things actually work.
So for our listeners out there, what should they be thinking about after listening to all of this?
Here's a question for you to think about. We talked about the Justice Department going after this alleged rent manipulation. But what about all those other factors driving up housing costs? The zoning laws, the construction costs, the interest rates. How are those playing out in your own community? What's the situation like where you live? And maybe even think about this. Are we as a society putting too much emphasis on owning a home? Could that be contributing to the problem? These are all things to consider as you follow this story and think about the future of housing.
Great questions, and we'd love to hear your thoughts too. What are you seeing in your community? What solutions do you think would actually work to address this crisis? It's a conversation we all need to be having. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.